welcome to Tanakh Talk. I'm your host, William Hall, broadcasting live from Kingsland, Texas, USA, with another episode of Controversial Issues with Rabbi Chaim Coffman from the Holy Land. Welcome back, Rabbi Coffman. It's always a pleasure. And today's hot topic is certainly going to be spicy on the answer board. So welcome back, sir. Always looking forward to moving on forward.
Always a pleasure when everything works well.
Yes, indeed.
Even if it doesn't work well, it's still a pleasure.
Very cool, very cool. I guess I have that effect on you at least. Not to say that's what everyone...
Listen, I got the claim to fame. Only knocked you out 3 times, right?
Yep.
Hopefully not 4.
And those were definitely knockouts for sure.
Yeah.
For the record book.
You know, we have wires like going. You know, that's my claim to fame right there.
There you go. There you go. So that's where we're at right now. So we're doing this. Who is considered a Jew? There's such a machloket, such a huge argument globally about, especially when it comes to like people leaving Christianity or people in Christianity. Christians saying that they're the new Jews. Messianics think Christians are fools, and then they're actually the real Jews because they're the new fulfilled Jews, if you will. And then you have people who are just simply out there who maybe they could be from another tribe or whatever, but they feel like they're the real Jews. You get the Hebrew Israelite.
We forgot about the Muslims. They think the Christians and the Jews are out to lunch, so that makes
right.
And then, everybody equal.
And the one of the ones that I've seen that I'm still not totally clear on, because usually when you hear something on the news, it's because there's something wrong with it. So, whenever you hear like Muslims, really scary terrorists, well, that's just the case on the small portion. So could be the same even with the Black Hebrew Israelites. I've seen one bundle of them online that I was thinking there is no way that's happening. I mean, these guys were dressed like gangsters. I'm not even joking at all, like deep rich chains and the sideways hats, and they even talk thuggish like you would expect a gangster to talk. And they were saying, "Yo, weird." I'm not trying to make fun of them, but I'm just giving you a real visual on how these guys were. And they were just hateful people. I'm like, you guys are really just out there, man. I don't get it. So you're going to cover all aspects. This could take more than one show, so we'll see what happens.
I don't know. I had a certain slant. You just gave me 3 or 4 more, so it could be.
Yep.
It could be a number of shows, but. If you ever hear Orthodox Jews speak like yeshivas, maybe you think they're thugs also, just the way they speak.
Right. So do me a favor,
since
we've got so much to discuss, if you don't mind, on this first show, because I need to go back once we're into the show, or at least after the show, and kind of modify the title so I can get the content correct. I definitely would like to hit the first portions of the ones we spoke about. Messianics for sure. They think that they're the new fulfilled Jews, but then you're going to have to get, of course, the people who feel like that everybody's a Jew if you believe in God. You become part of the family just by believing in it. So if you don't mind, right on.
Right. Yeah, I don't mind. And if I did mind, well, I don't know. That's why we do this show anyway.
That's true. All right, take it away. It's all yours.
Anyway, I was going to hit it from a different angle. I think I want to hit it from one angle, and then I'm gonna, the introduction to the introduction, we'll hit the other things in stride, because I think this is going to be a good segue.
Okay.
There's a fundamental question, that comes up, all the time, and you mentioned it by Messianics. You got the Black Hebrews, you got even Reform and Conservative, who will say, well, who says the Orthodox are right? We have a right to change things. We have a right. Whatever. You got the Christians saying we're not chosen anymore, etc. You go to Jeremiah chapter 30 and all that with the new covenant, etc. But, the method to my madness in this question was, it was a little bit, of everything combined. But the question, that I had in mind, again, this probably could be, multiple shows, was, what makes someone a Jew? Now you're going to say, well, isn't that what I just said? Well, the problem is some people may say, that Judaism's a race, right? And this is what came up last week, and I already spoke about this, so we're not going to go into great detail, about the Holocaust and what Whoopi Goldberg said, which was absolute stupidity, right? But her whole thing was, well, the Holocaust wasn't about race, because but someone said, they considered the Jews a different race. So she kept saying, well, it's not about race. It's about man's inhumanity to man, right? But the question is, the Jews, were enslaved. They were enslaved by Pharaoh in Egypt. You look at the Holocaust in general, in its volume, the horrors, the single events, the genocide. It doesn't mean there's not genocide of other peoples also. But this was 100%, a genocide against a race where they claim were inhuman or subhuman, etc. So they were 100% targeted by Hitler, Yamach Shemoy B'Zichroi, may his name be blotted out. That's what they set out to do. Now, for her, race, is about, anything against blacks, right? But she totally missed the point. But we're going to use what she said as a segue, since she's getting a lot of publicity here. We'll give her a little more publicity. So she's saying that, Judaism is not a race. Okay, so what is it? How would we classify, what Jews are? I mean, isn't it true the Jews went into Egypt and they came out, God made them into a nation, right? A nation, not a bunch of individuals. He took them out, took them from a slave mentality, and he made them into a nation, right? Now, does that mean they're a race necessarily? Right? They're a nation. What does the nation mean? What's the purpose? Why did God take them to Mount Sinai? Right? God took them to Mount Sinai for one reason, in order to give them the Torah. That's what makes them unique more than anyone, more than any other nation. God singled out the Jews. The Jews agreed. The Jews said, Naseh v'nishma, we are gonna do, and then we're gonna hear what God says. So if that's the case, God chose us, we chose him. So that makes us unique in the sense that no other religion, not the Christians, not the Muslims, not the Hindus, no one else has ever made such a claim, right? The God spoke in front of 600,000 men between the ages of 20 and 30, not including women and children. So he's talking about 2 to 3 million people. So very good. So that distinguishes the Jews from everybody else. But is that what makes them necessarily Jewish? Right? The first Zionists, the idea of Herzl, anyone ever read his book, The Zionist State, right? His goal was to find a place for Jews to live. He didn't care if it was Uganda. He didn't care if it was Argentina. He wanted the land of Israel, but if he wouldn't have got it, it wouldn't have made much of a difference, right? He would have been happy in any place. Now, the question is, maybe the Jews are defined by the land. Maybe, the land of Israel, it's a holy place. How do we know it's a holy place? Because God told us, right? Torah tells us many times, Abraham, we're going to take your progeny, to the land of milk and honey, right? Isaac, same thing. Jacob, same thing. And all their progeny. That's where they're going to go. Now, is it the land itself that makes the Jewish people different? So that's what the Zionists thought. They want to have they want to have a land of Jews, but not necessarily a Jewish land. Right? So Rabbi Chaim Coffman, Hashem Yikam Damoy, God should avenge his blood. He spoke in England. To raise money for his yeshiva in Baranovich. And when he got up to speak, he got to speak on Shabbos. My Rebbe was there as a child, as a young child. And he walked in the synagogue, and he went there to speak. And he went there to speak to raise money for his yeshiva. So when he went to speak, he spoke right before the additional service, Musaf, as part of the morning service. And so he got up to speak, and he spoke about the difference between what's the difference, he said, between a goy and an am. Right? A goy means a nation. It also means a non-Jew, but in this context, it means a nation. An am, ayin mem, also means a nation. Right? So goy, I think, if I remember correctly, right, means that you can have a nation. You can have a nation, even if it doesn't have its own land. Now, I could be mixing this up, but I think that's the case. In other words, you could be a nation, but you don't have your own land. Right? It's kind of, what kind of nation you're going to be. You don't have any sovereignty, other things. But be that as it may, said you can also, there's also this idea of an am. What is an am? An am is a people, that's attached to the land. Now, being attached to the land, we're not just talking about land for the sake of the land. Meaning that Rabbi Chaim was saying that you can be subservient to the land, so to speak, or not subservient, but you can live in the land, but what does the land do? Does the land, if it has intrinsic holiness, does it obligate me in anything? Or is it just another piece of property? Right? So what was Rabbi Chaim saying? And he hammered the point that these secular Zionists, when they wanted the land of Israel, their idea was to have Jews live in the land. Had nothing to do with Torah or with mitzvahs. So he said you cannot have a nation that's part of a land and they're only tied to the land itself with nothing else. In other words, it's only dirt, it's only rocks, it's only stones, it's only trees, waterfalls, whatever, right? But it has no connection to Judaism at all. So Rabbi Chaim started speaking against this whole idea. It's like a body without a soul. He started hammering the point, bam, 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 bam. And he looked around, and my Rebbe said, he looked around, and people started to leave. They showed protest over here. Why did they show protest? Because they said he was hammering the points of people who think it's all about just a piece of property. It has nothing to do with Torah mitzvahs. So he was hammering the secular Zionists. That's what he was doing. So in the end, they barely had enough people, to finish the service. So my Rebbe was walking him home. He said, what's going to be? What's going to be with the yeshiva? You were here to raise money. So he told him, so Rabbi Chaim said, I'm here to tell people, there's a problem. There's going to be a disease in this generation, right? And so he's hammering the point against secular Zionism, in that you cannot have a state without Torah and mitzvahs. You can't, right? So the question is about living in the land, and that's not, not going to go off tangent here. That's not the topic. That's not the point. What's the point, right? The point is, how are the Jewish people defined? The Torah tells me clear. The end goal is to get the Jewish people to the land of Israel, right? Now, there was exile, right? We know there was exile by the first temple, by the second temple. I had someone once tell me, kind of a silly thing. They tell me, I was talking about the importance of living in Israel, whatever, one of my secular relatives, and they asked me point blank. They said, well, how do you know? How do you know that's the end game? I said, well, did you ever read the Bible from cover to cover? It's pretty clear. The Jews are supposed to be in Israel, right? That's where they're supposed to be. Now, the fact that, we have the land now, it's pretty miraculous. But the reality is, even if that's the case, so we got spit out. So the question, again, second temple, first temple, second temple. So we're still in exile, even though we have the land back today. But what's that, so that we're getting back to the question, right? Without getting sidetracked. What is the definition? Is it just about land? Does that define who we are? Now, according to the Torah says clear. Many times, that's where we should be, right? It's pretty clear, right? The land I'm going to give you, the land I'm going to show you, the land of milk and honey, many, many times, over and over and over. So you might say, going to the land is the ultimate, but the problem is, we're exiled. We're exiled a number of times. So if we're exiled a number of times, does it not mean that the land's not important, that the land still doesn't have holiness, right? According to many, the land still has holiness, right? Because God's presence was there. It hasn't fully gone away. We don't, we're living in a world of hiddenness within hiddenness. That's for sure. But we see a lot more divine providence here than certainly than other places. But even with that, it's the definition of a Jew because we were given the land of Israel, right? Torah makes that clear. Is that what defines us? Now, that's part of it. I would say that's, God made us a nation, right? The hardest thing, I can't imagine this. The Jews were slaves. They have a slave mentality. God takes them out. He takes them out of Egypt. He changes their slave mentality in order for them to be slaves to who? To God himself. How are they going to be slaves to God himself? What are they going to do? God spoke to them on Mount Sinai, right? He passed everything down to Moshe. Moshe passed it down to us, and throughout all the generations. So essentially, I could say that from that, what did God do? He took a slave mentality, took all these people, and he made them into a unit, into a single unit. Now, if God made us into a single unit, that status would be a nation. But we're not a nation like everybody else. God makes that claim a number of times, that God chose us from among the nations. We're not the same, right? The anti-Semites, they all say the same thing, right? If you look at the book of Esther, what is Haman, Mr. Haman himself? What does he say? He says to Achashverosh, these people, they don't eat your same foods. They don't keep your holidays. If you touch their wine, they're going to spill it out because it's got spiritual cooties, etc. They won't drink it, right? Exactly what, other anti-Semites say as well. They have different laws, different things, different this, different that. They're not going to integrate. They're going to stay in their own, with their own language, their own people, blah, 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 etc. So now, that being said, we are unique. We have unique laws, right? That there's no question. So that is one aspect, I would say, that differentiates Jews from everyone else. Right now, people make the mistake. This is going to be one example. People make the mistake because there are a number of places. There are a number of places in the Torah where it says it's a law for everyone. Right? It's a law for everyone. Yeah, but it's not. That's not exactly what it means. Non-Jews, some, what we'll call super Noahides or whatever, they say, see, we can do exactly what Jews do. But that's not what the verse means. Yeah, it's talking about something specific over there. Obviously, again, that's why you always need oral law to tell me what it's talking about. Right? But if it wouldn't tell me what it was talking about, maybe I'd think that. Maybe I would think, there's one law for everyone, and that applies. I have a video like that on YouTube, spoke about it. Right? I spoke about it at length. But the point is, they're going to say, look, there's one law, right? Just like you mentioned before. So a non-Jew can think, I'm Jewish in my heart. You didn't even mention that, but I've heard that a number of times. I'm more Jewish than most people. God's going to understand. I don't have to go through conversion. Right? So, we can speak about conversion at some point also. Right? Why a non-Jew would have to go through conversion. But, it doesn't matter what's in a person's heart. It doesn't matter if they do more than most Jews and this and that. 90% of world Jewry does not know how to read the Aleph base. Right? So that's no big thing. Even if they're a bunch of non-Jews who know a lot more, maybe keep more, than what Jews do. It doesn't matter. If a person has that genealogy, has that pedigree, we'll speak about that as well. See if I get there. Right? But they have a pedigree. Since they have a certain pedigree, there are certain things, there are certain dominoes that have to fall in a row, in order for this to work. Now, another problem, where someone's going to say we're all equal, the Torah doesn't say that. The Torah says the Jews are the chosen nation, right? We are, we're supposed to be a light unto nations. So if that's true, by default, that means we're different. That means we're not the same. You're going to tell me a few places it says we all keep the same thing. It's all one law. Can't mean that. Right? Forget about oral law. I'll make the Karaites happy. Right? Forget about oral law. We don't even need oral law. Right? Because if you're going to tell me we're chosen among the nations, that doesn't mean Jews and non-Jews are equal. They're not. Right? No offense to any non-Jews listening. We're not equal. We have different obligations. That's what we have. So now, someone's going to say, I'm a Jew at heart. Right? The cardiac Jew. I hear that a lot. I'm a, what do you call it? A cultural Jew. That means I eat bagels and lox. I may go to Jewish things, go to synagogue, this and that, but I'm a cardiac Jew. I'm a cultural Jew. Now, non-Jews may say, I don't need, go back to this point. I don't need conversion. I'm a Jew in my heart. All I have to do is feel like a Jew, right? And they'll bring other verses totally out of context saying, see, I can, there's a verse in Isaiah that would seem to say that non-Jews can keep Shabbos. That's not what it means. Totally taken out of context, among other things, that some non-Jews will do. So the first thing is, or maybe the second or third, I don't know, I lost track here, that to be a Jew in your heart, to think, I can do what I want, etc. Maybe the Jews aren't chosen anymore, blah, blah, blah. I can do exactly what I want over here. It's not true, right? It's certainly not true, because the Torah tells me it's not true. You're going to have to come up with an answer. I mean, I guess the Christians and the Muslims both have their crooked answers as to why we're not chosen anymore, right? But the Torah makes clear, we're a light unto nations, we're chosen, we chose God, He chose us, for better or for worse. Now, the real question, I guess this is just introduction. The real question is, what distinguishes a Jew from everybody else? Right? That's really the question. So we mentioned it can't be just the state of Israel and being the state of Jews. That can't be it, because it's only a piece of land, right? So to speak. So, but why is the land holy? The land is holy because God told us it's holy. The land is holy because God said we have to conquer it. But what are we supposed to do in the land? What does God say? You have to keep his commandments. You have to keep the covenant that he made at Mount Sinai. It's not just I can do whatever I want, right? Just the opposite. If a person lives in the land of Israel, right, even today, and they're going to mess around and do what they want, they're not going to listen to what God says. The punishment is much more severe. Now, I'm not saying the punishment wouldn't be severe if you were doing it anywhere else, but if you're in God's backyard, right, or in front yard for that matter, right, you're in God's backyard over here, God can get a little bit ticked off if we don't do what we're supposed to do. People of Sodom, some of the commentaries say, God wiped them out. Yeah, the Torah says they were very evil. They did terrible things. That's very true. Some of the commentaries say, though, they were in God's backyard. He couldn't stand it, right? He destroyed them. He just totally destroyed them, right? I'm not saying they weren't evil. They certainly were. But there was another added factor, some of the commentaries say. One of the added factors is it's in God's backyard. He said, no, I am not going to have this. I'm not going to have this in my own backyard. I'm going to wipe it out. So that the punishment is more severe. Right? So now, what makes the land of Israel unique also? I mean, it is kind of ironic that, the UN, not that we hold by the UN, but the UN has condemned Israel more than any other nation combined. Right? But any of these other rogue nations, right, boggles the mind. The land of Israel is no bigger than the state of New Jersey. Right? There's 22 Arab countries around Israel waiting to destroy, God forbid, this land. What? They need another piece of land? No. Not interested in the land per se. They're interested in getting us out. That's what they're interested in, right? But what makes the land unique and what makes Jews unique? It's only by one thing. It's only by the covenant. It's only by the covenant that God spoke to Moses and the Jewish people at Mount Sinai. That's what makes us unique. In other words, anyone who comes to me and they're interested in conversion, my question at some point in the conversation will be, I'm not here to convince anyone to convert one way or another. But if someone says, I believe God spoke at Mount Sinai, he spoke to Moses, Moses passed it down to us, and our covenant is I have to keep whatever the Torah says. Now, if someone says, that's what I'm willing to do, and that's what it's all about, okay, they're certainly on the right track, right? That there's no question. That's what differentiates us. Now, come to these other nations, and these other nations have to bring their proofs, which, unfortunately, the proofs are not certainly conclusive at all. But they're going to bring their proofs and say, you know what? Covenant stops. It stops by you. You got to believe in JC. He's got a new covenant. And all that. So they have their own proofs. Muslims have their things, whatever they say, etc. So one thing is, God made a covenant. He first made a covenant with Noah, and afterwards with Abraham, with Isaac, with Jacob, then with the rest of the Jewish people, right? Certainly at Mount Sinai, as we mentioned. So there's a covenant between God and the Jewish people. Now, what is that covenant? Some people think, well, there are a bunch of different movements within Judaism. You got the Reform movement, you got the conservative movement, and in England and other places they're called progressive, whatever you want to call them. You got modern Orthodox, open Orthodox, ultra Orthodox, whatever. So some people say, tongue in cheek, if it depends which line you were in at Mount Sinai. If you were in the Reform line, you didn't get that many mitzvahs. If you were in the conservative line, you got a few mitzvahs. If you were in the Orthodox line, you got all the mitzvahs. Now, obviously, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense, right? The reason is that when God gave the Torah, he gave the entire Torah, right? Moshe passed it down to us, right? He taught the elders, and the elders, taught everyone else with Moses on top of them, explaining everything. So what makes us unique is that covenant. But that covenant is about obligation. Now, what that means is a Jew could decide, God forbid, they could say, you know what? I'm not interested in the covenant. I was born Jewish, but I'm embarrassed to be Jewish. I'm not interested in being Jewish. That's why I have 70, 80% into marriage. That's why I have so much assimilation, right, over the last 100 years. What's going on. That's worse than what Hitler Mova Zichro did, right? He did it physically. We're doing it to ourselves. I mentioned earlier in the class today, in the early 1990s, there was a study done that said we were losing 35,000 Jews a year, 35,000 to assimilation into marriage. Now, how many converts and secular Jews become Orthodox Jews in a year? It's not 35,000, right? That was already 30 years ago. So I'm telling you, the statistics have to be higher, right? It's probably doubled by now, right? But even if, let's say, I'll be generous, let's say at 5,000, right? Secular Jews become religious, and you have, combined with converts every year, right? I think it's a high number, but let's say, but you're still losing 10 times more. So the assimilation rate's gone, super high. So the issue is that secular Jew, as long as their mother is Jewish, we go by matrilineal descent. Patrilineal descent, going after the father only, is about the tribe. We don't know, nobody knows which tribe they're in except for Cohen. Someone who's a Cohen or a Levi, right? They are Levites. They come from the tribe of Levi. And how do they know that? They know that because it's passed down generation. It's something everyone knows. I had a relative once say, how do I know I'm not a Cohen or a Levi? I said, because your father would have told you. And so he came back to me and said, come on, like maybe he got lost. I said, but it's something everybody knows, right? If you go to, if a person goes to the cemetery, you can see there people buried there. If they're Kohanim, they have, they'll have like engraved, in the stone, like their hands doing the blessing of the Kohanim. So you know that they're Kohanim, right? So there are things that we know that are passed down. So this person asked, does anyone have any papers, documentation? Now, there are some people that do, that have, a certain pedigree, that they do have certain, papers, but most people don't. It's something that's known in the family. That's, that's really the bottom line. So in this case, patrilineal descent describes what? Something external, i.e. the tribe, right? Who we're going to be from. But nobody knows. Nobody knows which tribe they're going to be from, right? Except if you're a Cohen or a Levi. And so we go by matrilineal descent, right, of who the mother is, right? If the mother is Jewish, then the child is Jewish. Now, even if the mother, God forbid, is married to a Gentile or had relations with a Gentile, right, with a non-Jew, child's still Jewish. Now, technically speaking, the child's Jewish. The Talmud says a number of things. Maybe the child's blemished. Maybe they're considered, some say they're not Jewish. Well, there's a whole discussion, right? But the bottom line is that child's considered a Jew. So now, by the Orthodox, if a person's mother, if their mother is Jewish, then that child is Jewish. Now, that doesn't matter what that child does. That child grows up and becomes an apostate, right? Child becomes a Christian. Child becomes a Hindu. Let's say, does that status mean they're no longer Jewish? And the answer is no, right? If they convert to another religion, as people have said, let's say a person converts to Christianity. So if I pour a little bit of water on you, you know what that means? It means you got a little bit wet. That's all it means, right? In other words, the person, after they die, after 120 years, even if they converted to Christianity, they're going to get judged as a Jew. You can throw away your Judaism as much as you want. You can't hide from it, right? You may lose your status by being a Jew for, in other ways, right? If someone desecrates Shabbos in public, we'll just throw this out there. A secular Jew desecrates Shabbos in public. So if you have wine that's not cooked, they can't touch it, right? Spiritual cooties, as I mentioned before. You can't answer amen to their blessings, right? There are a lot of different factors over here, involved. But they have the opportunity to repent, even if they desecrate Shabbos in public. Even if they were idolatrous. Doesn't matter what idol. They were idolatrous. There are many ways they lose their status as a Jew, but guess what? If they die, they're going to get judged as a Jew. They have the opportunity to repent. 100% they have the opportunity to repent. So therefore, whatever happens, even if they intermarry, same thing. There is a certain level of repentance for that, for that as well. But the point is that as long as the mother is Jewish, it doesn't really matter what the child does in general. Again, I don't want to be hammered over here. In general, that child will not lose that status. 100% they won't lose that status as a Jew, right? And it is kind of ironic in this, in this generation. You can have Connollys or Donnellys that are Jewish because the mother's Jewish, and you can have, Coffmans or whatever that aren't Jewish because the mother's not Jewish. So for us, that's pretty crucial, right? The mother has to be Jewish. Now, regardless of what happens after that, in general, right? That's gonna be the status of the child. That doesn't change. So a person can run away from it. They can do whatever they want. At the end of the day, they still have that pedigree. Now, certain things they may do, they may have blemishes on their soul. According to some, they may have to even potentially go through a conversion, a strict conversion, etc. Which, without going into all that, the point is that they have a pedigree. Now, anyone else coming in, they're going to have to explain, as we mentioned before, they're going to have to explain what happened to us. What happened to our status? Because essentially, God says in the book of Deuteronomy, he said you can't add or subtract to the Torah. Which, if you use internal logic, when the Christians say, and that's, not necessarily my forte, but I will mention this, that in Jeremiah chapter 30 says a new covenant, it cannot mean a new covenant. It cannot mean that we're not chosen anymore. Because God says you cannot add or subtract to the Torah. Now, if they hold that Moshe Rabbeinu, that Moses himself is a prophet, right? If he's the prophet, so you can't go against what he said. So they have their own answers, right? But if you look at in most of these things, as we did a show before, looking at all these things they take out of context, if you look at the beginning of the chapter, it's talking about reconnecting to the old covenant, right? And repenting and reconnecting to that old covenant. Oh, so why is it called the new covenant? Oh, that's a good question. But internal logic will tell you it cannot be something new, right? Really new. Why? Because you can't add or subtract, right? How do they get out of that? So I'm sure they have their own. I'm sure they have their own answers, right? And then you got the Muslims also. They're going to say we're not chosen, so the Christians aren't chosen. They'll have their own reasons for who knows, for who knows what. But bottom line is, how what's the criteria? Right, so we mentioned at the beginning, not to get lost with all these, different moving parts. Do we consider the Jews? Are they a race? Are they a nation? There was a story many years ago, I think in the early 1930s, 1940s, I think I forget where it was. There was a discussion among professors, I guess Jewish professors. What makes a Jew a Jew? Right? Someone says because of the land of Israel. Someone said because they're a race, because they're this. And then this old Polish Jew, walks in and he slams his hand on the table and he said in Yiddish, which would be very easy to translate, right? He says, a Jew's a Jew. That's it. A Jew's a Jew, right? So what did he mean? A Jew's a Jew. So we have to have some level of criteria. Because if we don't have a level of criteria, then anyone can say, well, I'm also Jewish, right? I can also be Jewish. What do you mean you can also be Jewish? There has to be a set of criteria. How do we know that you're Jewish? So some people say, well, wasn't Moses black? Or wasn't, his wife, right, was a Cushite, dark skinned. So you got a lot of Jews that are dark skinned, certainly from Arab lands, right? Morocco, Tunisia, other places. You got Sephardic people, very dark, extremely dark. Right, so you're gonna say, well, it's only the black Hebrews. They're the only ones. They're the only ones over here. Where the question is, where's the burden of proof? So they want to say, I come from this tribe, or we do. That's a question I get a lot of times. I'm pretty confident I come from this tribe. Yeah, Elijah the prophet's gonna come at the end of days, and whoever survives, whichever Jew survive, he's gonna tell you. He's going to tell you, unless you're a Kohen or a Levite, or All right, but he's going to tell you which tribe you're from. So they're going to say, no, I'm from this tribe. I'm from that. Where do you know that from? You know that from it's coming out of your elbow. Nobody knows. Nobody's a prophet today. The only prophecy we have, as the Talmud tells us, is either from imbeciles or little children. There's no prophecy today. There are great rabbis that have Ruach HaKodesh, divine inspiration, right? Divine inspiration, the lowest form of prophecy. Okay. But they have to bring the burden of proof. Because they could say, come on, listen to the rabbis, we get in this whole discussion, about oral law and this and that. So it's either you believe that God spoke at Mount Sinai or you don't. And you believe, and if you believe it, you believe there's a mitzvah to listen to the rabbis in every generation. So where these people are coming from, they're making up their own thing. They're making up their own religion, which is a Torah prohibition. Right? That's the problem. We're going to actually speak about that, in about an hour, more than an hour or so. That hour and a half about, for Noahites. That's why Christianity is forbidden. Not just that it's idolatry, but it's a new religion, the Rambam says. Islam is a new religion. Right? That, can't make up a new religion. Noahites cannot do things like Jews do. That's making up a new religion. So they're going to have to come up with, reasons, proofs, fundamental principles that make them who they are and denounce who we are, right? Or I shouldn't say denounce, but they knock us off, so to speak, because we're in the driver's seat here. So the burden of proof is not on us. We got plenty of proof. I don't think there's any doubt about it. We got plenty of proof. So they're going to have to come, they're going to have to bring it on our home court, on our home turf, and they're going to have to be the burden of proof. And they're going to have to show why we're not chosen, why matching with descent doesn't matter, why it's all in my mind, it's all in my heart, right? And people are going to say, come on, it's all one thing, it's all one mishpat, it's all one law, we're all together, right? We're all together. How does that make any sense? If you know what the Torah says in general, which most people don't, but if you would know what the Torah says, internal logic would tell you that can't be true. How do I know it can't be true? Because God says we're distinguished. What distinguishes us? The laws we keep. Kashrus, right? Family purity laws, right? Prayer, all kinds of things that distinguish us from everybody else. That's what makes us unique. If God, and I've made the statement before, if God wanted everyone to be Jewish, wouldn't they be Jewish? He could have made everybody Jewish, but he didn't do that. He didn't have any interest in doing that, right? So he made everyone, he made the Jewish people, they accepted him, God took them, fine, and everyone else, and everyone else is after them. Why is that? Very simple. Very simple, because we made that covenant. They didn't make, where do we see this covenant between God and other nations where the Jewish people get knocked out? Now, again, the Christians will probably bring, their proofs, and the Messianics will bring theirs, maybe similar, right? Muslims will bring theirs, and all the other religions, may bring all their different things. Okay, the burden of proof is on them. Because the bottom line is, none of these so-called religions ever have done what the Jewish people did. That means that God spoke to 3 million people in Mount Sinai, never been replicated. Right? I had these Mormons come to me and they said, what about John Smith? They hid the Book of Mormon, 200 years and he found it in the cave. I go, I got a better story. You ever read Exodus chapter 20, chapter 19, chapter 20? 3 million people that God spoke to. 3 million people. That beats your story of 200 years and he found a book in a cave. Right? All these things are unsubstantiated. Totally unsubstantiated. We've spoken about this before. The burden of proof is on them to show that we're not chosen and, all these other things. But it's ironic, it's ironic in many ways, that people will say, well, the bottom line is they want to do what they want to do and they want to believe in what they want to believe. Now, the problem obviously is, okay, as my father, blessed memory, would say, show me the green. Show me the proof. Show me. Right? Let's see where we're not chosen anymore. Let's see why you're right. The arguments they bring are not very strong. They're not very strong at all. And, as you mentioned by the Black Hebrews and this and that, groups doing all kinds of different things, not in line with what the Torah says. So if you want to say, well, we're the chosen ones and we're the right ones and this and that, so you're not allowed to veer from the right to the left. So how come your Torah scroll's not good? How come, your prayers are cut up? How come this? How come that? Bring myriads of proof of why things are not allowed to be changed. Right? They're not allowed to go from right to left and all that. It has to stay the way it is, the way it was passed down. Generation. So it's not about us. We have everything intact. Right? Sometimes it's better, sometimes it's worse, but we're doing what we need to do. There's a lot of things we can do better for sure. But at the end of the day, if you're going way back, so you have to say we made that covenant, right? And that not only that, but that's what distinguishes Noahites as well, because Noahites, they also have to make a covenant. They don't necessarily have to come in front of rabbinical court in order to take on the Noahide laws, but they can verbalize it. They can verbalize it in front of 3 people, right? Or in front of 2 witnesses. They don't have to do it in front of a rabbinical court. And they can verbalize and say, I'm taking on, these Noahide laws, not to do this, not to do that, not to do the other thing. But you know why I'm taking on the laws? Because exactly what the Rambam said. Because the Rambam says you have to reconnect to that which happened on Mount Sinai. That God gave the Torah to the Jewish people. Right? He passed it down to Moses. Moses gave it to us. And through those laws, right? Through those laws, what do we have? You also have the Noahide laws. You have the laws that apply to non-Jews. But that is a crucial thing for non-Jews, right? They have to reconnect to that covenant as well. And they're allowed to. And it's a good thing that they should do that. And it should be verbalized. But what's it dependent on? It's dependent on exactly what we said. It's dependent on the covenant, Exodus chapter 20, between God and the Jewish people. That's what it's dependent on. Now, as far as I understand, again, you go back, watch all those videos on oral law that we did. That has not changed. That has remained the same. So if that has remained the same, I'm going to say again, they're going to have to bring the proof why it's changed, why it's not the same, why we're not chosen anymore. And they'll say they have their proof. Very good. Right? But if they're mothers, and that's our main criteria here. If the mothers are not Jewish, then they themselves cannot be Jewish. Right? There's a question, I'll just throw this out there as well. There's a question about the Ethiopians. Ethiopians had, a lot of them intermarried, and there were certain things that they didn't get, certain holidays they didn't have, and one of the major things they didn't have was marriage or divorce. And if you say they didn't have Jewish divorce, that means a lot of their children could be mamzerim. They could be, I'm not going to say illegitimate children. They could be of a marriage or of a what do you call it? Of 2 people being together, not allowed to be together, right? A union. That's what I was thinking of. It's a union of 2 people not allowed to be together, right? So if you say that they're Jewish, then you got a problem that a lot of these people could be part of a union that is forbidden, and they're only allowed to marry people who've come through the same union or converts, because it's a question of pedigree. But here the chief rabbinate said you don't have to convert them. You don't have to convert them, right? Some of the one of the big rabbis there, said you don't have to convert them. So, but there's an issue. Everyone else disagreed. All the big rabbis disagreed. So that they have to go through. They should go through conversion. Why? Because you got a problem on the status of their pedigree. And if you got a problem and they're not Jewish, then you're not doing them any justice by saying that they're Jewish, right? In this case, they got the problem with people, with some people in Brazil, got an issue with that as well. But the point is, okay, so now they're going to say, you got the black Hebrews and others, going to say, we're the true ones and this and that. Well, I would ask a very fundamental question: is your mother Jewish? And if she's not Jewish, you go through conversion. I don't have to. Why not? Because it's one law for everyone. I'm Jewish in my mind. And I tell people this all the time, and it can be a little bit offensive, right? But it doesn't matter what's in your mind. It doesn't matter what's in your heart. A person wants to convert. They want to be part of the tribe. They have to go through a proper rabbinical court. That's what they have to do. That's what they're obligated in doing. It doesn't matter if they're doing more than most Jews. It doesn't matter how much they know and this and that. They have to move to a Jewish community. Doesn't matter if the Talmud said you have to or not. How in the world are you going to become Jewish if you don't live amongst Jews? right? The Rambam says the laws of repentance, there are 24 things that stop a person from repenting. One of them is separating themselves from the community. You can't live on an island. Maybe, 500 years ago, a non-Jew could be part of a Jewish community or see what Jews do and understand by osmosis. Today, it's not the case. So a person says, but I'm doing everything else. I'm just lacking this. Well, that's pretty much everything. Going in front of a beis din, you don't do that. Right in front of a proper rabbinical court, you're not going to convert. Right? I say, but it's in my heart. I feel it's in my genes. I took the DNA test. Okay. I'm not going to tell you what my DNA test came out like, what they said about me. Right? But DNA does not prove if a person's Jewish. Even if it says 10% they have Jewish blood. You want to prove that a person's Jewish, then either you have to produce a marriage document from parents or grandparents or even great-grandparents, which is not going to be so easy to do, right? A Jewish marriage document, or 4 generations, 3 to 4 generations buried in a Jewish cemetery, right? And most people cannot produce this. Even, they may have Jewish blood. So if that's the case, then a person would have to go through conversion. That's what they would have to do. But if the mother, unless they're going to hold by patrilineal descent, and they'll say, well, my father was Jewish, or my grandfather was Jewish, so that's good enough, right? There's a story with Michael Douglas. His son asked him. He said, well, if Grandpa's Jewish and you're half Jewish, does that make me a quarter Jewish? And the answer is no. It doesn't make you Jewish at all. Why? Because your mother wasn't Jewish, right? Or your grandmother, right? Sorry, your grandmother wasn't Jewish. Grandmother wasn't Jewish, right? So you won't be Jewish either. You'd have to go through conversion. Right? So it's all about pedigree. It's all about the covenant. You can't, Coffman's law is you cannot turn the Torah into a pretzel. Right? I'm going to patent that. Anyone who does it and puts that out there, I'm going to sue you. It's my line. Right? You can't turn Judaism into a pretzel. It can't be, I'm going to do what I want. I'm going to make it up as I go along, and it doesn't matter. Everything matters. Everything matters. All the details. All the details matter. Because, I'll give an example. I'll give a scary example. I remember when I was engaged many years ago, I read an introduction of a book by Aryeh Kaplan of blessed memory about marriage, and it was called Made in Heaven. So at the beginning, in the introduction, he said you should know what an important decision, this is. Marrying your spouse. This decision doesn't just affect you; it affects your wife. Affects your spouse. It affects your kids. It affects your grandkids. And I'm like, wow, this is too intense. I slammed the book. I didn't get further than the introduction. But let's think about it. If a Jew, God forbid, intermarries, right? We believe, as it's brought down, that we're 2 halves of a soul. So when a Jew gets married, that soul connects to the other half. It's like one soul altogether. But what if they forget about marrying the wrong person, even if they're Jewish, right? We'll make it very easy. What if they marry a non-Jew? They marry a non-Jew and they don't convert, let's say. So now you get a major problem. Because the other half of that soul, what happened to the kids that you were supposed to have? Those kids are not going to be born now from this union. So now God has to orchestrate in a whole different way of now what's going to happen to this other soul. Now that's only by one. Imagine if it's done 7 out of 10 times. If it's done 7 out of 10 times, you need the matrix. You need a supercomputer to figure out where all these other souls are going, which, whatever, is a whole separate discussion. But I'm only pointing out, if something gets messed up, you're going to say, oh, whatever, intermarriage, not such a big deal, right? Even if the Torah tells me many times, you're not allowed to intermarry. Oh, it's no big deal. But if one person intermarries, it messes up their spirit, the other half of soul. And it messes up all those souls that are supposed to come out. So God has to orchestrate it in a different way, right? The Talmud says that the Messiah cannot come till all the souls come out, right? So that totally gets messed up. Imagine if it's 7 out of 10, right? That's just only one example. It's only one example. So, details. Well, details are pretty darn important. So if the covenant, the covenant is not kept, in general, and it's not kept properly, so many things get messed up. Many mitzvahs not done right. Blessings in vain. Right? The list, I could be here till tomorrow because you're not going to give me till tomorrow. Right? Only got a few more minutes. But there are so many myriad of things that get so messed up. You're going to say, but it's detail. You're right, it's detail. It's a lot of detail. But when you mess up the detail, or in a lot of these cases, people doing what they want, learning, extrapolating this, that, turning the Torah into an absolute pretzel, it boggles the mind. But, the Torah is always intertwined. So we'll start what we said at the beginning. So Whoopi Goldberg believes we're not a race. So what are we? Right? We're a group of people. What do we have in common? Are we a nation? Are we not, Hitler Yamach Shemo thought we were a race, and he sought to eradicate a whole race, right? And anyone who does that, whether it's white on white, white on black, black on green, whatever, that's called, right, trying to destroy a race. That's racism, not just about blacks, right? It's about everybody else, right? Systematic eradication of a people, right? So when we're talking about that, right, that's the basis. That's the whole basis for the question. What makes us unique? So what makes us unique is the fact we have a covenant. We have obligations, right? Not only we have obligations, but we also have a land. But the land is only holy if we keep what we're supposed to keep. Right? There's a story, there was a story with an Arab terrorist in jail. Now, again, we're talking about an Arab terrorist here. We're not talking about a Rhodes Scholar by any stretch. So the Arab terrorist reading the Bible, and he sees that his Jewish jailer is eating a pita sandwich on Passover. Right? He's eating chametz. He's eating bread on Passover. So he asks him, what are you doing? Your Torah over here says you're not allowed to eat bread on Passover. You're not allowed to eat any leavened products. Now that's different. We're the new Jews, blah, blah, blah. These are old, antiquated laws, blah, blah, blah. What did this terrorist say? This terrorist said that here's a person that has no connection to his land. He has no connection to his history. If he has no connection to his history, that means it's only a matter of time before he's going to give the land back to us. Right? He's going to give the land back to us because he has no connection to the land. Connection to the land, and most of the people today that are coming to the land, and coming to Israel to live, are Orthodox Jews. Because most secular Jews do not have a connection to the land. You got these people, women of the wall, these reform groups that, want to have, egalitarian services at the Western Wall, blah, blah, blah. Most of them don't even know where the Western Wall is. Right? It's not even an issue by most Reformed Jews. It's kind of a, an ironic thing. So they threaten, we'll do this, won't give money, whatever. But they have no connection. They have no connection to the land. And the only reason why we, Orthodox Jews, have a connection to the land is because God said it's an eternal promise. Right? That's the covenant between me and you. You're going to keep the mitzvahs. There's special mitzvahs in the land that we can still keep today. But there's a connection. Right? If you don't have that connection, then if you go into most places in Israel, you'll think you're anywhere else except that you hear Hebrew. Right? That's the only difference. You go to Tel Aviv, you think you're in Miami. You think you're in other places. So it's all, in the Torah says many times as well, which, you'd have to ask the Messianics and the Muslims and everyone else. The Torah many times says this is an eternal covenant. This is forever, le'olam voed. According to every translation, it means forever, right? Or as we say in Boston, forever, right? It's forever. Forever means, I guess as the Karaites would say, it means eternal. It's forever. Right? It never changes. So many times, as I'm working my way through the Torah, many times when the Torah says this is the covenant forever, this is a mitzvah forever, I always mention this point usually. Right? It doesn't change. And the commentaries say, no, it's not a 5-year option to renew. It's not if I feel like doing it, I don't feel like doing it. So what are the Karaites going to say? What does it mean forever? No, it doesn't really mean that. No, it doesn't. They'll give Webster's fifth definition. No, it only means this. No, it only means this at that time and this and that. Right? You got to be consistent somewhere. So the fact that, the land of Israel is holy is because God said it's holy. And it's only holy as well, if we're keeping Torah mitzvahs, if we're upholding our end of the bargain, right? So to speak. Now, that doesn't mean you don't feel the holiness here. Anyone who's been here will say, sure, come to Jerusalem, it's not the same as other places, right? You sense it, you can feel it. even though God's presence not, we don't see God's presence directly here, in that sense, like it was in the first temple, etc. Okay, right? But even so, it goes back and reconnects to Mount Sinai. Now, now because of that, now we come full circle, right? Why? Because that's the whole point, is that we're taken out of Egypt for exactly that point. For in order to serve God. That's why some commentaries say Moses had to learn. He had to grow up in the house of Pharaoh, right? Why do you have to grow up in the house of Pharaoh? You had to grow up in the house of Pharaoh to know what it means to serve a king of flesh and blood. Because now, once he learns to serve a king of flesh and blood, then he's going to learn how to serve the King of Kings. Right? One reason. So that's what happened. The Jews have this slave mentality. God takes them out. And after taking them out, he says, okay, now we're going to make this covenant. Right? And he makes this covenant. And that covenant's for all time. So as we said before, I don't know if I covered all the points. Right? But as we said before, the burden of proof, is going to be on the other side. Right? To show beyond the shadow of a doubt that, this covenant doesn't apply. We're not chosen anymore. All these different things. And again, they may have their own proofs. Big deal, right? We certainly don't, we certainly don't hold by them. But, but again, that's where it's at. And it's about the holiness of the land. It's the fact that we, our obligation is to keep mitzvahs there. It doesn't mean everyone's going to come there and live, at least until the Messiah comes, etc. And we have an obligation to be subservient to God. That's, that's what it is. And someone's going to say, no, we're the real chosen ones. Okay, show me. Right? Show me why that would be the case. I'd love to see, we come from this tribe. What does that prove? What proof do you have? You have documents? You have marriage certificates from way back that say, born from this tribe? Is your mother Jewish? Let's say better. Is your mother Jewish? And if the answers are to no to any of these things, then, the burden of proof is on you, not on us. So that's that. I don't know. Did I cover all the points? I tried. So you'll tell me if, you'll tell me if there are other points that, that you want to cover.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah, I rewired my soundboard, and I'm still not used to where all the triggers are. I've been having sound issues for it seems like forever. And hang on, let me switch screens here.
Okay, I won't try and scream in your ear this time.
No, you're doing good. but yeah, I've been having sound issues for a long time, and I finally got a hold of my friend Mitch Houston, who's a wizard when it comes to sound and video, and he had me basically rewire my board and show me a different way to use all the buttons. So it's going to take a little getting used to, but it definitely works much better, I think. So, all right, good deal. Okay. So we're going to probably hit the same thing on the next run, round 2 of 50, I guess.
I don't know. It depends which aspects of this you want to hit. That's fine.
Okay. All right, cool. We'll take some feedback on, you guys can send an email if you want to knocktalkquestions@gmail.com, or reach Rabbi Coffman. You saw his email address on screen earlier. So
blow him up, not me. I'm good. He's fine. Just blow him up.
Right. What he said. So, all right. Well, that sounds good.
He's the disease and I'm the cure.
Oh, dude. Sylvester Stallone.
Had to get that in. Come on.
You did.
Cobra fan.
You did. Cobra fan. Yep, absolutely.
That's it.
Very cool. All right, you guys. Well, thank you all for tuning in. Be sure to hit that like button and subscribe. Turn on notifications. That way you don't miss anything that comes across the board. So you guys should have a great week. Rabbi, you too. Appreciate it. And we'll see you guys on the other side. Take care, everybody. See, almost missed that one too. See ya.